Some friendships are so formative that it takes decades before the person who lived through them can talk about what really happened. For Billy Gibbons, the guitarist who would go on to found ZZ Top, that friendship was with Jimi Hendrix. Long after Hendrix's death in 1970, Gibbons has continued to revisit that brief but electric chapter of his life, offering interviewers glimpses of a bond that began almost by accident and shaped the rest of his career. The story starts in February 1968 in Texas, when Gibbons was still a teenager fronting a Houston psych-blues band called the Moving Sidewalks. The group had built a local following on the strength of a regional hit, 99th Floor, and that momentum was enough to land them a booking that would change Gibbons's life. An opening slot for the Jimi Hendrix Experience during a run of Texas dates in Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Houston. Gibbons has said many times that he still doesn't fully understand how a barely known teenage band ended up on a bill with one of the most electrifying guitarists on the planet. It's a great mystery, he said of the booking, and he's never pretended otherwise. There was a practical problem waiting for the band once they landed the gig. Their contract called for a 40-minute set each night, and the Moving Sidewalks simply didn't have 40 minutes of original material to fill it. Their solution was almost reckless. They padded out their set with 2 songs that already belonged to the headliner. Every night, before Hendrix even walked on stage, the Moving Sidewalks played their own versions of Foxy Lady and Purple Haze, Hendrix's own songs, performed as covers directly in front of the man who wrote them. Gibbons has recalled wondering aloud to his bandmates whether they dared to actually go through with it. It could have gone badly. Opening acts are not supposed to upstage the headliner, and playing someone's own hits back at them is about as bold a move as a young band can make. But Hendrix wasn't offended, he was amused and then impressed. Gibbons has described looking over during that first show and catching sight of Hendrix standing in the wings, arms folded, grinning as the band launched into their versions of his songs. When the band came off stage, Hendrix approached Gibbons directly. According to Gibbons, Hendrix grabbed him and told him plainly that he liked him, adding that Gibbons had a lot of nerve. That moment, on the very first night of the tour, is the one Gibbons has pointed to again and again as the start of their friendship. The gesture didn't stop at a compliment. Later that night, when the touring party ran into trouble securing hotel rooms, Hendrix intervened on Gibbons's behalf, making sure the young guitarist was given a room close to his own rather than being shuffled off elsewhere. It was a small act, but for a teenager suddenly touring with one of the biggest names in rock, it signaled something rare. That Hendrix saw him as worth looking out for, not just as an opening act to be tolerated. What followed was, by Gibbons's own account, an ongoing education. Watching Hendrix play night after night gave him a close-up view of a guitarist who was rewriting the rules of the instrument in real time. Gibbons has talked about how Hendrix was doing things with the electric guitar that, in his words, had never even been thought of. Things the instrument wasn't designed to do. He's described specific details from those nights. Watching Hendrix modify his own gear, for instance, including taking coils off the spring inside a whammy bar, so he could dive the pitch further than the factory setup allowed. He's also spoken about the way Hendrix built his sound around the interplay of the whole trio, relying on Mitch Mitchell's drumming and Noel Redding's bass to hold down a rock-solid foundation so that Hendrix himself could take the lead guitar as far out as he wanted, always confident that the rhythm section would still be there when he came back. Gibbons has said that lesson stuck with him directly. It shaped how he later built ZZ Top around the steady, locked-in rhythm section of Dusty Hill and Frank Beard, freeing himself to improvise on top of it the way Hendrix had shown him was possible. Gibbons has also credited Hendrix with specific, technical insights that most fans never hear about. He's talked about the string-bending trick behind the opening of Foxy Lady, describing it as a kind of controlled vibrato that had to be practiced and paired with a powerful amplifier to get the effect right. He's pointed to Hendrix's use of the guitar's pickup switch as something that doesn't get nearly enough credit. Hendrix, according to Gibbons, was the player who discovered that flipping the switch to the in-between positions produced tones nobody had used before, and he even showed Gibbons how to physically modify the switch's spring mechanism so it would hold steady in those in-between spots instead of popping back into place. These are the kinds of details that only someone who spent real time standing next to Hendrix, watching him work, would know. And they're the details Gibbons has chosen to share. One of the most enduring images Gibbons offers of Hendrix is the contrast between the man on stage and the man off it. Gibbons has consistently described Hendrix as shy in person, almost reserved, someone who didn't seek attention when the show was over. He's called Hendrix a retiring personality offstage, someone who could seem almost withdrawn. But the moment a guitar was in his hands and the stage lights came up, Gibbons says that changed instantly. Hendrix came aglow, transforming into a showman capable of pyrotechnic invention that left crowds stunned. It's a detail Gibbons returns to often because it captures something that studio recordings alone can't. The sense that Hendrix's genius wasn't just technical, it was theatrical, and it seemed to switch on and off depending on whether he was performing or simply existing. The friendship also produced a memento that Gibbons still owns and still plays. At some point during the tour, Hendrix gave Gibbons a pink, late 1950s Fender Stratocaster, reportedly telling him it was too pretty to burn, a reference to Hendrix's own reputation for setting his guitars on fire during performances. Gibbons has kept that guitar in his collection ever since, and has said in interviews that it still gets used in the studio from time to time, decades later. He's even pointed to a specific ZZ Top track, A Fool for Your Stockings, where he played that same Stratocaster. When the guitar wouldn't run properly through his amplifier during the session, the band plugged it straight into the mixing board instead, which is why, according to Gibbons, that track has such a distinctly clean tone. Beyond the gear and the guitar lessons, Gibbons has talked about a broader shift in perspective that came from being around Hendrix at that age. He's described the sense of watching someone treat the guitar not as a fixed object with a fixed set of rules, but as something to be taken apart and reimagined, a mindset Gibbons says he carried directly into the early years of ZZ Top and has never really set aside since. He's also spoken about the encouragement Hendrix gave the Moving Sidewalks regarding their own stage presence. The band had a habit of leaning into visual spectacle, including an on-stage device that produced a glowing rain-like effect during their set. Gibbons has said that leaning into that kind of showmanship was actually Hendrix's suggestion, that as the young band took the opening slot on that 1968 tour, Hendrix told them to keep leaning into the theatrical side of their performance rather than dial it back. What makes Gibbons's account valuable is that it doesn't lean on myth-making. He isn't trying to paint Hendrix as an untouchable legend floating above ordinary life. Instead, the picture that emerges from Gibbons's own words is of a working musician who was intensely curious about his instrument, generous toward a much younger and far less experienced guitarist, quietly reserved when the cameras weren't rolling, and startlingly transformed the instant he had to perform. Gibbons has framed Hendrix's brilliance as something built through relentless tinkering and study, modifying gear, discovering new, tonal territory on his own instrument, rather than something that simply arrived out of nowhere. It's also worth noting how tightly bounded this friendship actually was in time. The whole relationship, at least in terms of shared touring and direct contact, appears to have unfolded over a matter of weeks in early 1968, centered on a handful of Texas dates. Hendrix would die a little over 2 years later, in September 1970, meaning the entire arc of their in-person friendship was brief. That brevity is part of why Gibbons's memories carry the weight they do. They aren't the product of a long, ongoing relationship, but of a short, intense window that Gibbons has clearly turned over in his mind for more than half a century since. Gibbons has never framed his memories as an attempt to reveal some hidden or scandalous side of Hendrix. What he offers instead are specific, concrete, and consistent details: a compliment backstage, a room down the hall, a guitar given as a gift, a trick with a whammy bar spring, a habit of standing quietly at the side of the stage. Taken together, those details have become one of the more grounded and frequently retold accounts of what it was actually like to know Jimi Hendrix in the months before the world fully understood what he was capable of. And for Gibbons, who went on to build his own decades-long career on the blues rock foundation Hendrix helped expand, sharing those memories has become a way of keeping that brief, formative friendship alive, not as legend, but as something that actually happened to two young guitarists on a stage in Texas in February 1968.